The phone rings in the darkness. 3 a.m. Dr. Michael Harrison's hand trembles as he reaches for it, knowing what he'll hear on the other end. Another voice, another cry for help, another soul drowning in despair, reaching out to him. The man who used to save people from the very abyss he now finds himself falling into. But tonight, something is different. Tonight, when the voice on the other end whispers, "Doctor, I can't take it anymore," Michael feels nothing. Absolutely nothing. The words that once moved him to action now bounce off him like raindrops on glass. He stares at his reflection in the dark window, and for the first time in his 20-year career as a therapist, he realizes a terrifying truth. He has become the very thing his patients fear most, emotionally dead, trapped in a silence so profound that even screams cannot penetrate it. This is the story of how a man who dedicated his life to healing others lost his own soul in the process. Dr. Michael Harrison wasn't always hollow inside. There was a time when his patients' pain resonated through every fiber of his being, when their breakthroughs filled him with genuine joy, when going home to his wife Sarah and daughter Emma felt like stepping into sunlight after a long, dark day. His office on the 14th floor of the Metropolitan Mental Health Center had been his sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and he used to tell patients that no matter how deep their darkness, there was always light streaming in from somewhere. The irony of those words would later haunt him. Michael specialized in treating severe depression and suicidal ideation. For 2 decades, he had been a lifeline for hundreds of souls teetering on the edge of existence. He was known among his colleagues as the Whisperer, someone who could reach even the most unreachable patients, who could find the right words when silence threatened to swallow someone whole. But healing others had come at a cost he never calculated. Each session was like opening a wound and letting someone else's pain pour in. He told himself it was temporary, that he could compartmentalize, that his training would protect him. He was wrong. The change began subtly. A slight delay in his emotional responses. A moment's hesitation before offering comfort. The genuine empathy that once flowed like a river began to trickle, then slow to a crawl. But Michael, ever the professional, pushed forward. He had people depending on him. He had a reputation to maintain. He had a family to provide for. Sarah noticed it first. "You're here, but you're not really here," she said one evening as they sat at the dinner table. 8-year-old Emma chattered about her day at school, her voice bright and animated, but Michael stared past her, his mind replaying the day's sessions. The teenager who'd attempted suicide, the mother who couldn't stop the voices in her head, the war veteran who saw enemies in every shadow. As months passed, Michael's emotional numbness spread like ice across a pond. He began going through the motions of therapy sessions, his responses becoming mechanical, rehearsed. He knew all the right things to say, all the proper techniques to employ, but the heart behind them had gone cold. His patients began to notice. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been seeing him for grief counseling after losing her son, stopped mid-sentence during one session and asked, "Doctor, are you okay? You seem distant." Michael assured her he was fine, but her words echoed in his mind long after she left. At home, the distance grew wider. Sarah would reach for him in bed, and he would lie still as stone, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of his own breathing. Emma would run to him with scraped knees and hurt feelings. But instead of the warm comfort she once received, she found a father who patted her head absently and returned to his files. "Daddy, why don't you smile anymore?" Emma asked one Saturday morning as they sat at breakfast. The question hit Michael like a physical blow, but even that couldn't crack the ice around his heart. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button if this story is resonating with you. We have many more emotional journeys to explore together. The breaking point came during a session with Daniel, a 17-year-old who had been cutting himself. Daniel sat across from Michael, tears streaming down his face, describing the overwhelming urge to end his pain permanently. In the past, Michael would have leaned forward, his voice filled with urgency and compassion, fighting for this young man's life with every word. Instead, Michael found himself thinking about dinner plans, about whether he'd paid the electric bill, about anything except the desperate human being sitting 3 feet away from him. "I don't think you understand," Daniel said, his voice rising. "I'm telling you I want to die, and you're just sitting there like I'm talking about the weather." Michael tried to engage, tried to summon the healer he once was, but it was like reaching for something in a dream. The harder he tried, the further it slipped away. He prescribed medication, scheduled a follow-up appointment, and watched Daniel leave his office with the same dead expression he'd arrived with. That night, Michael stood in his bathroom, staring at his reflection. The man in the mirror was a stranger, hollow-eyed, hollow-hearted, hollow-souled. He tried to remember the last time he'd felt genuine emotion, the last time something had moved him beyond the surface. The memories felt like they belonged to someone else. The silence in Michael's world grew deafening. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of connection, of feeling, of humanity itself. He moved through his days like a ghost haunting his own life, present in body but absent in spirit. His colleagues began to whisper. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had been Michael's friend and mentor for years, pulled him aside after a staff meeting. "Michael, I'm concerned about you. Your patient evaluations have been declining, and frankly, you look terrible. When's the last time you took a vacation?" Michael assured her he was fine, but Jennifer's eyes searched his face with the same intensity he once used to read his patients. What she saw there made her step back slightly, as if she'd glimpsed something that frightened her. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a man trained to recognize the signs of depression, of emotional withdrawal, of psychological crisis, and he was exhibiting every symptom in the textbook. But knowing and feeling were two different things, and Michael felt nothing. Not concern, not fear, not even the desire to get better. At home, Sarah made one last attempt to reach him. She planned a surprise dinner, Emma's favorite meal, thinking that perhaps focusing on their daughter might crack through his emotional armor. Emma had drawn pictures of their family, stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun, and she presented them to Michael with the pure joy only a child can possess. "Look, Daddy, it's us when we were happy." The past tense in her innocent words cut through the silence like a scream. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she watched Michael stare at the drawing with the same blank expression he wore for everything else. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered that night as Michael lay beside her, rigid and unresponsive. "What happened to the man I married? What happened to Emma's father?" Michael wanted to answer, wanted to explain that he was still there, somewhere beneath the ice, but the words wouldn't come. The silence had become a living thing, filling his throat, his chest, his entire being. He had become the very isolation he'd spent his career fighting against. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. Michael answered on the third ring, his voice flat and professional despite being pulled from sleep. "Dr. Harrison, this is Detective Martinez with the Metropolitan Police. I'm calling about one of your patients, Daniel Morrison." The world seemed to slow down as the detective's words reached him. Daniel had been found in his bedroom by his parents. The cutting had stopped being enough. The 17-year-old who had sat in Michael's office just 3 days earlier, pleading for help, pleading for someone to care, had taken his own life. Michael listened to the details with the same emotional distance he'd applied to everything else in recent months. Time of death. Method. The note Daniel had left behind. But then Detective Martinez read one line from that note that shattered the ice around Michael's heart like a sledgehammer through glass. "I told my therapist I wanted to die, and he looked at me like I was already gone. Maybe I am." The phone slipped from Michael's hand, clattering to the floor. For the first time in months, he felt something, not healing warmth, but searing, unbearable pain. The silence that had protected him from feeling anything suddenly became a prison, trapping him with the weight of what his emotional absence had cost. He sat on the edge of his bed, Sarah stirring beside him, and the dam finally burst. 20 years of absorbed pain, months of suppressed emotion, and the crushing realization of his failure all came flooding back at once. He had become so afraid of drowning in others' pain that he'd forgotten how to swim in his own humanity. Sarah woke to find her husband sobbing, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal and broken. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. She simply held him as he fell apart, her own tears mixing with his. "I let him die," Michael whispered into the darkness. "I let them all down. I let you down. I let Emma down. I became everything I swore I'd never become." If this story is touching your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Sometimes the most important stories are the hardest ones to tell. Michael didn't go to work the next day or the day after that. He sat in his office at home, staring at the certificates on his wall, the thank you card from patients he'd helped over the years, the photo of him receiving the State Mental Health Professional of the Year award just 2 years earlier. Everything felt like artifacts from someone else's life. Sarah found him there on Thursday morning, still in the same clothes, surrounded by scattered patient files. "I need help," he said without looking at her, his voice barely a whisper. "I need help, and I don't know how to ask for it." Sarah knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. They were cold, shaking. "Then let me help you ask," she said. That afternoon, Michael made the hardest phone call of his professional life. He called Dr. Jennifer Walsh and told her everything about the growing numbness, about Daniel, about the silence that had consumed him. Jennifer listened without judgment, and when he finished, she said 4 words that began his journey back to himself. "You're still worth saving." Michael took a leave of absence from his practice. He began seeing a therapist himself, a woman named Dr. Rebecca Chun, who specialized in treating healthcare workers suffering from secondary trauma and burnout. The irony of being on the other side of the therapeutic relationship wasn't lost on him, but Dr. Chun helped him understand that acknowledging his need for help wasn't weakness. It was the first step back to strength. The healing wasn't linear. There were days when the silence tried to reclaim him, when the weight of his failure with Daniel threatened to pull him back into numbness. But slowly, painfully, he began to feel again. First came the grief, for Daniel, for the time he'd lost with Sarah and Emma, for the man he'd been before the silence took hold. Then came anger, at himself, at a system that pushed healers to their breaking point, at the unrealistic expectation that those who care for others should be immune to their own suffering. Finally, tentatively, came hope. 6 months later, Michael returned to his practice, forever changed. The office looked the same, but everything else was different. He had learned to recognize the warning signs in himself, to set boundaries, to seek help before the silence could take hold again. His first patient back was Maria Santos, a young mother struggling with postpartum depression. As she described her feelings of disconnection from her newborn, Michael felt genuine empathy, not the overwhelming absorption of pain that had once consumed him, but a healthy, boundaried compassion that allowed him to help without losing himself. "I understand," he told Maria, and for the first time in over a year, he truly meant it. At home, Emma ran to greet him with a new drawing, the same stick figure family, but this time all the figures were smiling, and the sun above them was bright and warm. "We're happy again, Daddy," she exclaimed, and Michael felt tears, good tears, spring to his eyes. Sarah watched from the doorway, her own smile soft with hope. They had a long way to go, all of them, but they were walking the path together now, no longer lost in the deafening sound of silence. That evening, as Michael tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at him with the wisdom that sometimes springs from children's hearts. "Daddy, why did you go away for a while?" Michael considered his answer carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people who help others forget to help themselves. I forgot how to listen to my own heart. But you can hear it now." Michael placed his hand over his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his palm. Not just his heartbeat, but the pulse of life itself, of connection, of hope. "Yes, baby girl, I can hear it now." Outside his window, the city hummed with millions of voices, millions of stories, millions of hearts beating in rhythm with his own. The silence that had once threatened to consume him had been replaced by something far more powerful. The sound of a life being lived, of connections being made, of healing happening one heartbeat at a time. Michael had learned the most important lesson of his career. In order to guide others out of their darkness, he first had to acknowledge his own. The silence had been broken not by noise, but by the courage to admit that even healers need healing. Even the strong need strength, and even those who save others sometimes need to be saved themselves. In the end, the most profound sound wasn't the absence of noise. It was the presence of connection, of love, of hope rising like a whisper in the dark, growing stronger with each shared breath, each offered hand, each heart brave enough to beat in harmony with another. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story moved you, please let us know in the comments which city you're watching from and what song or band you'd like us to create a story about next. Your engagement helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives that remind us of our shared humanity. Until next time, remember that even in our darkest silences, we are never truly alone.